All right, we just saw the Grand Budapest Hotel. I saw it for the second time, but Jeremiah and Nate joined me for this viewing. We'll give a quick overview, or they will, of what they thought of the movie, whether they liked it or not, whether they think people should see it or not, or who the audience for the movie is, and then we'll kind of dig in from there and talk a little bit more detail. So,
all right.
What'd you guys think?
I had a ball. I thought it was really funny. I don't have a lot of experience with Wes Anderson. I've seen Fantastic Mr. Fox, and that's it, which is not a very big, that's not a very great sample size for his work. And yet when I saw this, I thought, oh, this is obviously what a Wes Anderson movie is.
Yeah.
In a strange way, it's precisely what I've been told it was like. The difference being it was dry humor, but it was a lot goofier than I expected. There was a lot of jokes that was like, oh, that was a lot closer to like a banana peel kind of joke, yeah. And it was okay to go for a broad laugh now and then. Mm-hmm. And I think what I liked the most about it is I went in really cold. I didn't know much of anything about this movie, but there were moments where it would just give you like a sting, and I wouldn't dare say what they were, because part of the joy was just how surprising it was.
Yeah.
And how like it would just do something and you would be caught off guard, because it would happen really quick and very intensely, and then it would move on to the next thing really fast. And I had a ball. I thought it was great.
Cool.
Yeah, same here. I think if you're already a Wes Anderson fan, you're going to love this movie. And I think maybe if you're not a big Wes Anderson fan, I think you would still really enjoy this movie. I'm pretty sure the only other two Wes Anderson movies I've seen are The Royal Tenenbaums and Life Aquatic. And I liked them, but I liked this one a lot more. I think I laughed at this one far more than I laughed at the other two, for sure.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's very accessible, which I think is really nice. It's because it goes for those broad jokes. There's moments where you don't feel like you're being left out, because sometimes you see a movie that's this dry, it's this feeling of like, oh, that's a little. It's only funny if you've seen it 3 or 4 times. And it did have those moments, but it also had just immediate boom jokes right there.
Yeah, and I obviously recommended it, the first time through. Watching it the second time, I have to say, like, some of the things that I had reservations about when I talked about it earlier, like some of the stuff that was off-putting the first time I saw it was more from familiarity with Wes Anderson movies, and how he sometimes gets a little violent just for no reason. But in this movie, like, it was always humorous violence. It wasn't like over the top scary, like triggery virus.
Like slapstick violence almost.
And so watching it the second time and knowing that there wasn't any real, like, knowing what all the consequences were, it totally defanged any, like, I wasn't afraid for anybody, and it made it more plain what it was, that this is just a farce. It's almost a Monty Python-esque at times farce. Yeah. Lots of jokes and just
really smart jokes.
Yeah, it reminded me the most probably of some of the broader Coen Brothers kind of movies. I thought specifically of Raising Arizona, which is a favorite of mine. But that same kind of somewhat surreal, dreamlike goofiness that also, once you kind of pass that goofiness, there's now a completely new level of funny that develops past that. And it had that quality to it.
So we liked it. That's our basic recommendation. Yep. Getting into a little bit more detail, it's interesting. Like, there's the spoken humor, the kind of funny, like, they would start wafting into prose, and then they would just, like, sort of. The reason I kept saying Monty Python is it reminds me of how Arthur just keeps, like, screaming Jesus Christ all of a sudden in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And this is kind of what happens in this movie, is like,
especially with
Ray Fiennes.
Ray Fiennes' character Gustav, where he's so proper and refined.
He's all erudite, and
so so whenever, like, something gets to the point that he, like, lashes out and spouts off profanities, like, it's really jarring, but it's
hysterical every time.
He's funny because he's a really well-spoken, articulate character, but he's not a very reserved one.
Right.
So he's very impassioned and will get very intense, and will just go swing between these insane highs and lows. Mm-hmm. I noticed that too, just these little small details that you hit it once and it's you're like, oh, that's interesting, and they hit it twice and you kind of laugh, and then once they hit it the third or fourth time, it's a lot funnier. There's a character who's got a birthmark in the shape of Mexico on her face.
With Baja, Mexico and everything.
Yeah, it's like it's a perfect, and they don't mention it till 3/4 of the way through the movie.
Yeah.
It's just, every time you see her, there's this Mexico birthmark on her face.
I watched it the first time going, I know that shape.
Yeah.
I know that is something, and I cannot figure out what it is.
And I think it's mentioned once in like passing and never brought up again.
Yeah, he just brings it up like they're on the train, like, this
She's
beautiful girl.
Yeah, she's very charming, has a birthmark, looks just like Mexico, and that was it.
Yeah. One thing I want to see what you guys think of this. I sensed, at least by the end of the movie, there was a real sense of loss to it. And I say that because it takes place in it's like 4 different levels of when it takes place. But the main story takes place in the 30s, just in the eve of World War II, in a made-up country that doesn't actually exist.
With like a World War II analog and
So
and
there's
Nazi
like
stand-ins.
It's not real
exactly.
World War II.
Yeah, I mean it's basically intended to be the war, whatever.
Eastern Europe.
Whatever the war might be.
Yep.
And it's happening just as that is kind of heating up, and as we know this now, and with hindsight, that kind of changes everything. And then it jumps ahead to the 60s when it's kind of a communist Iron Curtain kind of thing of it, and it's a really kind of rundown hotel. And then it jumps to like the 80s, and it keeps on like leaping forward and then going back further. Every time it goes back, it starts using these little film techniques from the 30s. It'll start, the aspect ratio changes.
Yep.
And sometimes it'll just focus in on one character with like an iris, like a very like kind of a.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the technique is called. And even there's times when there's going to be 2 characters who have a close up, and the focus around the edges will be a little softer, which is a very 1930s kind of trick.
Yeah.
And so there's this kind of almost like longing for that very old style that he's bringing back a little bit. And I thought that was something that I definitely, certainly by the end of it, when you learn the fate of different characters, and it's often not as, you just saw kind of a happy jaunt with them, and then there's this sort of coda to it that's a little less happy, maybe. And it seemed jarring initially, but then I thought, well, that's kind of where he was going with the whole thing, and I think that, I thought that felt really appropriate. I don't know what you guys think of that, but...
Yeah, I think it's a nice way to set each... time period of the movie off.
Yeah, definitely.
It gave each a different feel, even though most of the 90% of the movie is
Back
in the 30s, so that's what you see most of.
Yeah.
But it's a nice way to frame the other time periods for sure.
Yeah. I also thought that they made a point of the further back in time, it also meant the more detached you were from the storyteller. So you were going through
like third hand.
The girl reading the book, being told by the author, being told by F. Murray Abraham, which was taking place in the 30s. And the further back you go in time, or the closer to the actual storyline you get, the less realistic things are.
Yeah.
Everything's all that pastel sort of thing comes through. So in the 30s, everything is very... art directed and art designed.
Yeah.
And then everything in the 60s is like a little bit more realistic. Things are run down and shabby, but still kind of, pretty and dressed up. And then they get back, like at the end when they're showing the 80s, like there's the room that's not even painted yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just gets more realistic as time goes by.
Well, and what gets fascinating then is you start thinking about the idea of an unreliable narrator.
Yeah, exactly.
How is the narrator affecting this? When you're hearing it third hand, the point at that point is not to tell the truth; it's to tell a good story.
It's the romanticized version of what F. Murray Abraham told him.
And in that case, it works really well with that Wes Anderson idea of just having this straight, square-on shot with everyone centered, and then it just pans slowly horizontally, very geometric kind of form. To me, that always harkens to like a stage, something that's very like the proscenium stage.
Yeah.
And so you have something that you're watching that you understand is detached from reality, and you are expected to acknowledge that. And I think when you're going back further in time, I think that works really well because it does give it a kind of a storybook quality. I'm a little more detached from this. I'm looking at it from back here. This is not realistic, which is, I frankly, that's something refreshing. I think a lot of movies today want realism at the expense of anything else. We expect special effects to blend in and not be noticed, and not look fake, quote unquote.
Right.
When in fact that can often date them a lot faster. And so I think that's a really good point. It becomes less grounded the further out you are. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, that's what we thought. Do you guys have any other thoughts or?
Just I wanted to mention there's a lot of stunt casting.
It's sheer number of cameos.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's everyone who's ever been in a Wes Anderson movie, as far as I can tell.
He tends to do that. I mean, Bill Murray and Owen Wilson show up in pretty much everything.
And Luke Wilson's there at the beginning.
Schwartzman.
Yeah, and what's funny is when you get to like, oh, someone's on screen for all of 30 seconds is trying to guess who they are, and like, oh, who the and I sometimes that can be really distracting. Luke Wilson was the first concierge.
Oh, you're right.
He was a crappy concierge.
Oh, you're right. Okay.
And some of it.
No, that was Schwartzman.
Was it Jason Schwartzman?
Owen Wilson was the.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Concierge when
you're right.
During the occupation.
Yeah, you're right.
That was Owen Wilson.
Yeah, that was Owen Wilson.
Yeah, Luke Wilson. I don't think.
No, Luke Wilson. I don't know him.
Glad we got that figured out.
Disregard. No, but I do. Sometimes that can be a little distracting, and but again, when it's this goofy, it doesn't really matter. And the other nice thing is it helps you keep the character straight. When you Jeff Goldblum, I forget his name, but I remember Jeff Goldblum being important in doing this.
Yeah.
And his amazing mustache.
Oh my! Yeah.
There was some amazing facial hair.
There was a lot of amazing facial hair.
It was pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, now that you mention it, I'm gonna just go get pictures of the mustaches now. Yeah.
You didn't feel threatened at all, though, did you, Jeremiah?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Right on.
I felt a little threatened. I can't grow a beard and mustache. So.
Well, thanks for watching. Again, we'll see you next time.
So long.